has come to own a part of the human emotional spectrum, which we can now call the Kafkaesque, and which, thanks to him, we're able better to recognize and to gain a measure of perspective over and relief from. Kafka's world isn't pleasant. It feels in many ways like a nightmare, and yet it's a place where many of us will, even if only for a time, in the dark periods of our lives, end up. We're in the world defined by Kafka when we feel powerless in front of authority, judges, aristocrats, industrialists, politicians, and most of all, fathers. When we feel that our destiny is out of our control, when we're bullied, humiliated, and mocked by society, and especially by our own families. We're in Kafka's orbit when we're ashamed of our bodies, of our sexual urges, and feel that the best thing for us might be to be killed or squashed without mercy, as if we were an inconvenient and rather disgusting bedbug. Franz Kafka was born in Prague in 1883, the eldest child of a terrifyingly psychologically abusive father, and a mother who was too weak and in awe of her husband to protect her boy as she should have done. Kafka grew up timid, bookish, meek, and full of self-hatred. He wanted to become a writer, but it was out of the question in his father's eyes. So one of the greatest German literary geniuses since Goethe was forced to spend his brief life on Earth working in a series of jobs utterly beneath him, in a law office and then an insurance company. He had a number of unsuccessful relationships with women. He couldn't marry or raise a family, and was tormented by the strength of his sex drive, which made him constantly turn to brothels and pornography. Kafka published very little in his lifetime, just 3 collections of short stories, including his best-known work, The Metamorphosis, and he was entirely obscure and unnoticed. His gigantic posthumous reputation is based on 3 novels, The Trial, The Castle, and America, which were all unfinished because Kafka was so dissatisfied with them. He gave orders that they be destroyed after his death. Fortunately for humanity, these were disobeyed. It shouldn't sound prurient or reductive to suggest that one of the major keys to understanding Kafka is to fathom the nature of his relationship with his father. Kafka never wrote directly about this man in any of his works, but the psychology of the novels is directly related to the dynamics he endured as the very unfortunate son of Hermann Kafka. Any boy who has ever felt inadequate in front of or unloved by a powerful father will at once relate to what Kafka went through in his childhood. In November 1919, at the age of 36, 5 years before his death, Kafka wrote a 47-page letter to Hermann, in which he tried to explain how his childhood had deformed him. Like many victims of abuse, Kafka never stopped hoping for some kind of forgiveness from the person who had so wronged him. "Dearest father," went the letter, "you asked me recently why I maintain that I'm so afraid of you. As usual, I was unable to think of any answer to your question, partly for the very reason that I am afraid of you, and partly because an explanation of the grounds for this fear would mean going into far more details than I could ever keep in mind while talking." The grown Kafka abased himself before this father. What I would have needed was a little encouragement, a little friendliness, but I wasn't fit for that. What was always incomprehensible to me was your total lack of feeling for the suffering and shame you could inflict on me with your words and judgments. It was as though you had no notion of your power. Kafka complained of one particularly traumatic incident when, as a young boy, he called out for a glass of water, and his irritable father pulled the boy out of his bed, carried him out onto the balcony, and left him there to freeze in nothing but his nightshirt. Kafka writes, "I was quite obedient after that period, but it did me so much incalculable inner harm. Even years afterwards, I suffered from the tormenting fancy that the huge man, my father, the ultimate authority, would come almost for no reason at all and take me out of bed in the night and carry me out onto the balcony, and that meant I was a mere nothing for him." Boys need their father's permission to become men, and Hermann Kafka didn't give Franz a chance. At a very early stage, you forbade me to speak. Your threat, not a word of contradiction, and the raised hand that accompanied it have been with me ever since. Franz's sense of inadequacy was total. I was weighed down by your mere physical presence. I remember, for instance, how often we undressed in the same bathing hut. There was I, skinny, weakly, slight. You, strong, tall, broad. I felt a miserable